Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Brydge podcast. Today, we are joined by Adela Jamal. She is the general partner and co founder at Milemark Capital, an early stage venture capital firm investing in diverse teams using applied AI to rewrite existing business models. Prior to Milemark, Adela was an executive director with Sony and received her MBA from MIT. Adela also currently serves on the steering committee for the Allrays Los Angeles chapter. So, welcome. So excited to have you on the show today.
Thanks, Griffin. I'm so glad to be here.
So you are currently the managing partner and co-founder of Milemark Capital. Can you start out by just giving us some background on what Milemark Capital is?
Sure. Happy to. So, Milemark Capital is a new VC firm, and we're based out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. For those of you who've been out there to the East Coast, totally different from the West Coast, but absolute gem, and I would certainly call it an innovative hub. So, we focus on early stage tech companies. So, thinking of those really early stage companies who are building with three things, and I actually like to think of a Venn diagram. So think of applied AI, think of innovation hubs, so the MIT, Harvard, and of course, other hubs around the nation, and then also diversity. So with those three things in mind, we're really at the bullseye at the center of it. And while we are sector agnostic, I like to say, we are focusing on sectors of significance, and that really comes to health tech, ag tech, fintech, even biomaterials, really thinking of sectors that are primed for innovation, and we're seeing also a lot of movement.
Do you want to help us even better understand the thesis by sharing maybe one or two portfolio companies that your team has invested in?
Sure. So one of the companies that I, like to share as an example is Piction Health, and the reason for that is because I think people can very quickly relate to the problem that they're solving, and also probably know someone who's, been sort of trying to figure out like what skin rash or skin disease they have. So Piction Health was started by Susan Conover. She's the founder and CEO, and she herself was actually diagnosed with melanoma three times. And through her personal experience and her personal sort of health challenges, she very quickly realized that, getting really good access and good care is very, very difficult. And if you don't get to a dermatologist in time, it really could be a matter of life and death. And so going through her own sort of, challenges there, she was, able to spin up Piction Health, which helps to very quickly and very accurately get that initial diagnosis. So where you might be waiting 6 months for the in-person doctor's appointment, with Piction, you're getting a 48-hour turnaround. And when you go in to see a dermatologist, you're probably getting, the sort of initial screening and diagnosis with, 50% of accuracy. But using computer vision and their technology, which is built on proprietary data sets, you're getting results with 93% accuracy. So it was very, very, easy to understand that they were first solving a really important problem and then layering that with AI. And we absolutely have, just loved seeing how the team has sort of expanded. I think they just saw their, 1,000th patient. They've now partnered with insurance groups out on the East Coast. And we're just excited to be, backing them. And of course, a big play on diversity, not only with their team, but also integrating with diverse skin tones.
Very important problem to be solving for. I don't know if you saw the recent news that came out around the reporting on cancer diagnoses, and younger people under the age of 50 has like really skyrocketed, I guess, in the
Mhm.
past decade. So very scary, and definitely need solutions like Piction to solve and catch those
Right.
things early. That's
Right. And
amazing.
it's also great timing, right? Because you think of the access that we have now, everyone's got a smartphone, a smart device, but a decade, 2 decades ago, it just wasn't even an option. And so I think we're going to see, more companies are evolving with that sort of technology lens in mind. And I think it's absolutely, timely.
Definitely. So tell us more about the Milemark co-founding team. How and why did you guys come together to start Milemark Capital?
Sure. So I was, very fortunate to actually meet my co-founders while I was at MIT. And three out of the four of us were actually classmates. We all did the Sloan Fellows MBA program together. And then our fourth partner is a current Sloan professor. And, I say that we were also fortunate because we sort of all three of us took a step aside from our careers. And this is coming after like 20 years of work experience to do the program. Whereas I would say you're more sort of, standard MBA programs would be catering to folks who are maybe in their 20s and have a couple years of work experience. But it's really important when you think of, having 20 years and then sort of pivoting and then thinking about, okay, well, you've had a couple of jumps and what do you want to do next? It gives you a lot of time to be intentional. And if you can sort of bake in that intentional pause like we did, we were able to then sort of circle around the idea of, okay, well, we see a big gap in the VC landscape. We see that teams do not look like us. I've seen, VCs and startups for, 2 decades being, in and or out of Silicon Valley. And so we were very, quickly able to understand that there really is this new wave of entrepreneurship, and we're not seeing them supported in the way that we think that they should be. And we really wanted to fill that void. And also ultimately, just to be so, kind of just like philosophical about it, like we wanted to leave that mark on the world. We wanted to really think about doing something that was going to make a lasting difference and build something of significance, and Milemark was going to be it.
Tell us more about your career before VC. Give us that perspective of where you're coming from as an
Sure.
investor.
So for me, it was interesting, and I'm sure we'll get into this in this conversation. But I, coming out of undergrad in a business background, actually took my first official job, let's call it, with a startup. And at the time, early 2000s, it was pretty rare to do that. I remember friends even just asking, and family is just saying, well, you're going to get a real job. I mean, what is this whole startup about? And it's funny because if I hadn't taken that first sort of leap and said why not, it wouldn't have opened the doors, which ultimately ended up then being working for an incubator, a large incubator in the Bay Area, supporting 400 startups under one roof. It wouldn't have gotten me into consulting and working with big tech companies, and then also eventually being an executive working for Sony Pictures in Los Angeles. And I share that having the experiences and also working at the various sizes of companies sort of give me that understanding of what that landscape looks like, what the companies need at each of those turns. And most of my friends have usually started out in like one or two industries and sort of stay there their whole career. But for me, just being really curious led me to ultimately realizing, really in the midst of COVID, when a lot of people were reassessing what they wanted to do, I was really aware that, there's more happening at the intersection of innovation, finance, tech, and diversity. And I wanted to go out there and do something different. And I felt as though I was sort of hitting a wall with, what I was doing currently and really itching to make that pivot. But for me, just having that journey and really being able to leverage all the connections and the network prior to the MBA, prior to making a big pivot was, I would say really, really fortunate. But I always like to peel it back and understanding what was that first experience that kicked it off. And I always share, with girlfriends, with other people I talk to, that I like to sort of think about, what would happen if you said yes? And, what would happen if you consistently challenge yourself?
To that point, will you walk us through kind of those different pivots over the course of your career, from startup to working in an incubator to going back to a bigger company like Sony? Like, what were your takeaways from each of those different experiences, and why did you make each of those changes?
Mm-hmm. So, I'll say, just kind of stepping back a little bit, everything was really based off of, my foundation, right? And for me personally, I was born and raised in India. Father is South Indian, mother's white American. My upbringing was, let's call it, just unconventional, very unique, for that time period, and maybe even now. So I was able to grow up between India and the US. And so my view of the world, my understanding of, just also being like a woman in the workplace was really different. And even though it was really challenging, during those early years, now I think back and I'm actually, very grateful for that awareness at an early age, for the ability to, have a father who's an engineer and an entrepreneur, and just like, what I sort of took for granted, like dinner table talk is a little bit different when that's who your parent is. My mother is an educator and, very big into women's advancement. And that was in India in the 1970s. But all of that sort of, I think was ingrained in me that there are different opportunities out there. And so, as I mentioned a moment ago, my first job was working for VC and working for a tech startup in Palo Alto. And that was by way of, introduction through someone that I knew who said there's opportunity, and Della, they're looking for someone who is, organized and driven, etc. And I just said, yeah, I think I could fit the bill, and let's go try it out. Um, but that was the first sort of taste of, okay, well, here's a role. And I was director of operations and really just did everything for the company. And I got to see, what goes into the day to day, what goes into hiring, bringing on partners, trying to, double and triple our numbers, trying to generate revenue. And it was almost, I would say, like a mini MBA, because you had to do everything and you had to learn. But again, because of my upbringing, I think I was able to lean very heavily on, okay, I've seen, what this has looked like in the family business. I've seen, what it means to have really important and really, great essential relationships, like how important is networking. And I leveraged that. And I would say that's probably what got me to that next jump, which was working for the tech center, the plug and play tech center in the Bay Area. It was through someone I met through that ecosystem. And I was always very curious about understanding what that next layer of business looks like. So the startup, of course, very young, very loose as far as, rigor and sort of structure. And then I sort of took a step up, which was, okay, well, here's an incubator, and you're seeing now hundreds of startups, but you're also seeing, how they're housed and how the machine sort of operates around them, that ecosystem. And then that led into consulting, which was, okay, now you're going to have sort of this really cool opportunity to be, pointed and plugged into the larger organizations, right? Thinking of like big tech and just thinking of more established companies, but then also getting a lens into, okay, well, let's look at cost centers, let's look at the basics, and different aspects that we just didn't have in the younger companies. And then ultimately, when I got down to Los Angeles, I was able to leverage that background. And a recruiter, in fact, reached out and said, we want someone who's entrepreneurial, but you're going to be in a corporate setting. And just think of like how interesting and unique that is, that you're being hired into a corporate function, but they want you to be entrepreneurial minded, and to find that fit with someone who had a tech background, who understood finance, who understood, technology landscape, and then also happened to be international, was tremendous, because ultimately working with Sony Pictures wasn't just Sony Pictures. It was also dually reporting and working on one Sony, which was PlayStation, music, electronics, and very international. And so I always say that, I think I sort of like fell forward, and I encourage other people to do the same thing. You might not have a plan, but just try to fall forward and see where you land.
Yeah, how did you come across the Sony opportunity? Because it is very rare to find a larger company that is looking for such a entrepreneurial startup mindset.
So it was an interesting opportunity, and also interesting timing. I had been looking, because I'd moved down to Los Angeles for personal reasons. I was, open to sort of making that pivot, and was in a position where I could sort of, cast a wider net. And I think oftentimes we don't end up doing that, right? We end up just looking for the same type of role, keeping it really safe. And it was just through a connection that someone saw that I was, looking for a new opportunity. And they had mentioned that I had this, very interesting sort of diverse background and diverse experience, which, led to this introductory call. But it was something that, I never planned for. I thought it would have been a very short stint, but I absolutely, enjoyed the experience, ended up meeting, even till date, some of the best people. I gained some incredible mentors from my time there. And then it also helped me, lean more into all the diversity work that I was doing, which was women in technology and different platforms, different e-bridges, and really offered me that launch pad, which ultimately was MIT.
Amazing. So I get a ton of questions about why the MBA. I would love to hear from you. Why did you decide to pursue your MBA at MIT? And also, can you explain how your program was a bit different than, maybe a traditional MBA program?
So to the first question, why the MBA? It had been on my mind for a good while, several years, and I think during COVID, as for many of us, of course, a very difficult time, but also a time of introspection and really taking a pause to reflect on who is it that you want to be, right? What is it that you're doing now? Where are you spending your time? What I noticed was that a lot of my time was spent thinking differently, spending a lot of time on women in technology initiatives. I absolutely loved the work that I was doing. Had probably at that time the best partners, the best colleagues, teams, bosses, that I could ask for, best stakeholders, most interesting work. And it was really just, stepping back and saying, okay, well, I think I'm on the right path and there's nothing wrong with me staying the course. It, continue to be successful and probably, rise through the ranks. But I was really itching for more and that challenge, as we talked about earlier. I noticed that that was going to have to be something very different. And the program happened to be, absolutely perfect for that. And I say that because while you can assess, the different MBA programs out there, you have the standard 2 year, you have the EMBA, so you could stay working. And I did look at it, to be honest, where I could have just kept working and then I would do, school basically, weekends and maybe some evenings. And then door number 3 was, well, what if you can't really fit, those two, or you don't want to sort of, carve out your time in that manner? You can then also, being an executive and someone with more experience, apply for the MIT Sloan Fellows MBA. And I believe Stanford has the MSX, but that's a master's, not an MBA. And for me, it was really important to get my MBA. And I also think as a woman, like, let's be honest, you need to be really mindful of those 3 little letters at the end of your name. And more than that, I also, my brother actually had done the Sloan Fellows MBA program, so I got to hear from him directly, how much he enjoyed it, what his thoughts were on the program. And I was also, I think, just very, honest with myself. If I would have pursued an EMBA and had to split my time between working and going to school, it would have been really challenging. And I'm someone who, is certainly going to work really hard at everything that I take on. And I think I would have probably had to pull back a little bit on the education because work would have come first. And that's, my employer. And so it was a hard decision. But after speaking to mentors, to advisors, everyone basically pointed and said, Adela, if you really want to go all in and you want to just, learn and sort of absorb everything that's, in and around MIT, you can only do that if you are not working and you're a full-time student. And so MIT, in that regard, through the Sloan Fellows program, offers just a really, really unique opportunity for folks who have that work experience, who, maybe have not had the chance to make that pause. And I can say it's, also one of the most global programs, I think also partly because of where they're situated, access to Europe, and it's just a really cool sort of global hub. And it was the best decision. And looking back, retrospectively, I could not have been more pleased with the people that I met, with the opportunities, that were presented, the resources, and, just thinking right now, it's been, almost 2 years since I graduated from that program. And, I feel like I've already had a whole new world and a whole new life sort of, spark in 24 months.
It's amazing. I also considered the Parttime MBA when I was applying, but I'm so glad that I did not go that route because it really is true. You just cannot ingest all the resources and
Mm-hmm.
have all the time to explore and think about new opportunities if you're not in the full-time MBA
Yeah.
position.
And,
So
I'll
when you
just add really quickly too, because I know, Refin, you're, at UCLA, and just from looking back, I actually did the women's executive program at UCLA.
Oh,
And
amazing.
that was prior to obviously going to MIT, but I call it out because it was such a great way to just take a little bit of a peek of, what does it mean to actually go back and have a class and be in a little cohort, because we actually had small cohorts, which was awesome. And we got to meet people from different backgrounds, different countries, different industries. And we were the first virtual cohort because, we were in the midst of COVID. But I call it out because it's a great program. And so anyone who's listening to this, especially for the women, it's reasonably priced. And I just think it's like the best bang for your buck.
Who is that program geared towards? Like later, like mid-career? What stage
I
career
would say
should?
mid-career and onward. You certainly want to have, some type of work experience so you can actually think about the exercises that they provide. They also give you a coach. You have these cohorts, mini hubs that you can sort of lean on. And I think it would be great for anyone. But if you really want to get, the most value out of it, I think it's helpful if you have at least, 5 to 7 years of work experience.
Yeah. So when you went into the MBA, did you know you wanted to start a VC firm, or how did you get to that realization, and how did Milemark Capital really come to be?
I knew going into the program that I was going to pivot. And it was going to be one of three things. First and foremost, it was certainly going to be, building something on my own. I was very focused on a number of diversity initiatives. I was focused, a ton of my time was on women's advancement. And I was even thinking, I'm either going to launch my own platform or I'm going to find, a team to work on something like this with. And it ended up being, launching Milemark and helping not just, one or two like women or, sort of slices of that problem that I was trying to solve. It ended up being, bigger and better than I could have imagined because now I wasn't just launching my own company, but I was actually working with a team to support, hundreds of founders. And looking at the VC landscape today, understanding that there aren't many, female funders, right? And therefore aren't many female founders who are getting supported. It was like just the best timing and, the best of both worlds. But to answer your question, I knew it was going to be a pivot. I just didn't think it was going to be such an incredible pivot and so well received.
I'd love to hear more about all of your work experience supporting women in tech and women in VC. I know in the time that I've known you, you've been an amazing advocate through Allraise as well as with Girls Who VC. Would love to know when you started working on these things and, more about your roles with Allraise now and everything you're up to in that lens.
Well, I'm glad that you're able to see it, a little bit of what I've been working on. And yeah, for anyone who knows me, I'm probably, at events and running several initiatives each month because I genuinely just enjoy that work. And in fact, it's not work to me. It's just, part of who I am. And I think that's also connected to just, my upbringing and being very aware of what, just a quick conversation with somebody, a coffee chat, or, just a little bit of time with someone who might be a little bit ahead of you down the road can do. I think it can be life changing. So that's sort of like my, general mantra. But as far as initiatives, I would say it started, several years ago, especially when I was at Sony. I was helping to lead their Women in Tech group and opening up, programs for them in Japan, in India, and then running the one in the US. When I went to MIT, I was a part of SWIM, so on their committee for the Sloan Women in Management group. And then I was also on the Sloan Fellows Women's Committee. And I would say that absolutely, was sort of like a nice bow around my experience there. And then coming out of MIT, being in Los Angeles, I was looking at various programs and trying to see, where else I could sort of lean into now that I had graduated. And Allraise was one of the first that, came across my sort of search. And through a lot of great women who I was having coffee chats with, just breaking into the VC ecosystem, several of them mentioned they're like, I think you'd be really great for this. And as luck would have it, I actually got to meet Paige, who's the new CEO of Allraise, and Elizabeth Tuttis, who was also part of Allraise, and just had these like very, honest conversations to say, here's what I'm about, here's what I'm doing. And I just felt there was a very natural, organic fit with also what they were then looking for as they announced that they had, these new committees forming. And so what I ended up eventually, interviewing for and being selected to join was their community relations team out of LA for the LA chapter. And that's also in conjunction, in supporting the other hubs, right? So they've got these chapters in Boston, San Francisco, New York, LA, and really it's national. And even if you're not in those hubs, it's a really neat setup because they have a ton of, virtual content. So you can get out there and do just, community building, you can do networking. There's a lot of education, which I think is also a big, part of sort of what all of us are doing. What you're doing is, getting people's stories to the forefront, but then also just ultimately thinking about how can we help women funders and founders, and how can we change those numbers?
Yeah, what are some events or things that your team is planning in the Los Angeles ecosystem, either upcoming this year or some things you did in the fall?
Sure. So actually next week, actually not next week, tomorrow, there's going to be a online, so Zoom session from the LA chapter, but again, open to anybody, nationwide with sort of that CFO lens. We're going to be planning a couple of events for March for Women's History Month. And then for sure, we'll be planning something for LA Tech Week, New York Tech Week. So any of these, San Francisco Tech Week, so any of these sort of, call them major tech events will most always have Allraise as a part of that. And they're rolling out new events and ideas each month. And so I always say, the best way to stay on top of it is just to go to the website, sign in, subscribe to their newsletter, and then also, share ideas, even, myself included. If there's somebody out there and they have a great idea or they think there's a void, I'm always, open to chatting and seeing, what else we can add, to sort of make sure that it's a well-rounded event. And actually, before the holidays, we had hosted an LPGP mixer and we brought in Poker Power. So you might have heard of Poker Power, really thinking about the poker playing skills and how that sort of conveys to, business and also women in business and that skill set. And it was just, an absolute pleasure to host that event. But then also just the takeaways, everybody, I don't think anybody left without, a glowing review. So we were really happy to host that event.
Amazing. Well, excited for many
I
fun
happen to be wearing
events.
their shirt just by
Oh my gosh, perfect.
chance.
I love that. So I personally believe that the way to get more female founders funded is to get more women into VC and capital check writing positions. So and I'm sure you have a lot of conversations with women who are looking to break into VC, which can be incredibly challenging. I'm curious, what advice do you have for women hoping to break into the space?
So I think the first thing that comes to mind is really thinking about, what type of company do you want to be a part of? So within the VC landscape, think really, hard about, do you want to join a young company, right? Do you want to join like an early stage company? Do you want to join a more mature organization or get into growth where you're going to rely more on data? Or are you okay being someone who's out there networking, working with early stage companies? And then also, very typical to any sort of job search, like what is the role that you want within the organization, right? So what are your real, let's call it, strong suits? Are you a data person? Are you an analytical? Are you thinking more like, the investor relations role, the business development role? So really thinking about that holistically. But, more broad strokes, it's also a real, I think, challenge for individuals who are just hearing, what we see is this really cool industry and I'd like to be part of it, without having done the homework, And so I always encourage folks to first just get out there, have the coffee conversations, go to the networking events, find someone that you can really sort of identify with and maybe just have an honest conversation with them about, what does their day to day look like? VC is not, for the quick, and this is like the long game, right? And so everything is at a different pace. It's slower. You have to be patient. But I always think that a lot of people don't hear about how difficult it can be and the challenges. And it's very similar to a startup, right? You're starting your own company, you're setting up a foundation. And while startups are looking just for, investors on one side, at a VC firm, you're sourcing for deals, you're looking for startups, and then you're also looking for investors, right? So I would say it's even more challenging. But really also thinking about that, risk profile, right? Like what is your profile and, risk averseness, right? I mean, are you going to lean into it or is it maybe something that you think is really interesting and you're more cut out for a corporate job, which is totally fine. And you need that financial stability. And of course you can go that route. But yeah, I'm seeing a lot of people, have their interest peaked. But by conversation two, I can tell that it's maybe not something that they want for, the next 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Who would you say VC is maybe not right for?
Yeah, I don't think it's ideal for someone who is not sure about where they want to be just yet, right? So again, not to say that you have to have, tons and tons of years of work experience, but you have to have a real draw to the industry and the type of work that you want to do. It's going to be really hard to get in the door if you don't have that, right? Because you think about how many people are clamoring to get internships, to get, fellowships, to, get an even just do a summer program. And it's a very competitive field. And if you don't know exactly, what you're doing yet or why you're doing it, I think you're better off maybe just, dabbling in the entrepreneurship ecosystem, maybe, work for a startup. There are a ton of people who actually come from the startup world and then get into VC because they understand it deeply and truly. But again, if you're looking for something that's more comfortable and structured and you like to just check in and check out, it's not going to be the role, right? It's going to be really hard because most of your colleagues are going to be working, it doesn't have to be around the clock all the time, but for me, my schedule is very flexible. And when something needs to get done, I get it done. I don't really draw the line and say, well, it's a 9 to 5. It's not for someone who wants a 9 to 5.
Yeah. Definitely not, and especially not at a new fund, because it's
Hmm.
a startup in itself, which is so interesting to learn. So, as we start to wrap things up, I'm asking all investors to choose a startup or VC term of their choosing and explain it for us.
Sure. So, as we talked about a moment ago, just thinking of how these firms are set up. We have on the left side, let's call it the startup. So we're always like sourcing. And on the right side, we have our investors, but you might hear the term limited partner when you're like, well, who's a limited partner? So a limited partner is essentially the investor, right? So each firm is going to have a group of limited partners, and they are going to essentially, feed into the fund. And then that's going to be the capital that we have as, the organization to then invest into the startups. But it does get a little confusing because you hear this jargon and you really don't know what someone's talking about. So just remember, if you're a limited partner, that's really the investor into the fund.
Yes. Who maybe what are two or three examples of an LP?
LPs come in different shapes and sizes. So I would say right now, actually in the news quite a bit, you hear of Bank of America, you hear of institutional investors. That's an institutional investor, right? It's going to be a larger organization. They usually jump in and fund, more on fund two and fund three. You also have individuals. So you might have, you hear the term high net worth individual, right? So these are all accredited investors as a foundation, but those would be individuals who are investing. So for example, you always hear about Mark Cuban, right? He's supporting a ton of really cool companies. He's supporting a lot of really cool funds. He would be a high net worth individual. And then you also have the example of family offices. So literally what it sounds like, there are families who actually have that sort of work and committee and office structure to assist in their investments in their entire investment portfolio. And they also are looking at times to, either invest with startups or with funds.
Amazing. And my favorite question, can you share a female founder, investor, or leader who inspires you and a bit about why?
So many people come to mind. I'm going to mention two. So Paige is the new CEO of Allraise, and I have to, give her a shout out because she's done an incredible job, sort of, taking the reins and really focusing on, what we need to be looking at now versus when Allraise started in 2017. And just seeing the work that she's done in less than a year has been remarkable. So if you don't know her, certainly, look her up, follow her, and hopefully get a chance to meet her at some of the Allraise events as well. And then the second person who comes to mind, self-made, just love following her story, is on Arlen Hamilton, Backstage Capital. Just a really, really incredible story as to how she's built her company. She has, just gotten actually the likes of Mark Cuban and other notable investors to support her. But really, truly, just seeing somebody who came from absolutely nothing, has built this career, and has an incredible following, and everything that she does, just admire and find so inspiring. So definitely check her out if she isn't on your radar already.
Both are definitely on my radar. Awesome women to highlight. I'm actually
Hmm.
hopefully going to have Paige on this spring at some point on the podcast. I'm
Perfect.
very excited about that.
Perfect.
And then finally, where can people find you and where can people find Milemark Capital?
So Milemark is on LinkedIn, and also you can just go to milemark.capital. And I am most active on LinkedIn and Instagram.
Amazing. I will make sure to link all of those things in the show notes. And thank you so much for being here. This is so fun, as always, to catch up. So excited to finally have you on the show.
Thanks so much, Ruffin. And thank you so much for all of the great episodes and information that you're bringing, front and center. I think it's so deeply appreciated.